Welcome to another sleepy night. The Forgotten Stone Watchers, welcome to tonight's story. Another boring tale from history designed to help you drift peacefully into sleep. Tonight we're traveling to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to the slopes of Mauna Loa, where archaeologists in 1962 discovered something that doesn't quite fit the accepted timeline of Pacific settlement. You don't need to remember any of this. Just find your most comfortable position, turn off the lights, and let your mind wander as we explore this drowsy mystery. The volume will gradually decrease after minute 50, so you can simply let consciousness fade away. In the summer of 1962, a team of geologists studying volcanic soil composition on the northwestern slopes of Mauna Loa made an unusual discovery. Dr. Harold Matsumoto, a soil specialist from the University of Hawaii, was conducting routine core samples when his drill hit something unexpectedly hard at a depth of 12 feet. What emerged from that hole would puzzle researchers for decades and remain largely unreported in mainstream archaeological journals. The object was a carved stone head, roughly 2 feet in height, bearing a striking resemblance to the famous moai statues of Easter Island, yet predating any known Polynesian settlement of Hawaii by at least 800 years. The basalt from which it was carved contained mineral compositions that matched no known quarry sites in the Hawaiian island chain. More puzzling still, carbon dating of organic material found embedded in the statue's base suggested an age of approximately 1200 CE, far earlier than the accepted arrival of Polynesian settlers around 1300 CE. Dr. Matsumoto initially assumed he had stumbled upon a misplaced artifact, perhaps something brought by early Polynesian voyagers from Easter Island. However, as his team continued excavating the site, they uncovered not one, but 17 similar stone heads, all buried at varying depths and arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern around a central stone platform. The platform itself was constructed of precisely fitted basalt blocks, some weighing over 3 tons. Using a construction technique that differed markedly from known Polynesian building methods, the discovery site, located in what locals called the Valley of Whispers, sat at an elevation of 6,800 feet on Mauna Loa's rain shadow side. This location made the find even more perplexing, as it lay far from any known ancient settlement areas and in terrain that would have been extremely difficult to access for transporting such massive stoneworks. The valley itself was a narrow gorge, perhaps 200 yards wide, carved by ancient lava flows and surrounded by steep volcanic slopes. What made the discovery particularly unsettling for the research team was the condition of the statues themselves. Unlike the weathered moai of Easter Island, these stone heads appeared remarkably well preserved, their features sharp and detailed despite their apparent age. Each face bore unique characteristics. Some appeared almost European in their features. Others showed distinctly Asian traits, and still others seemed to represent facial structures that didn't match any known Pacific Islander populations. Most unusual aspect of the statues, however, was their eyes. Each had been carved with deep, hollow sockets that created an optical illusion from certain angles. The empty eye cavities appeared to be staring directly at the observer, regardless of their position relative to the statue. This effect was so pronounced that several team members reported feeling uncomfortable working alone near the excavation site, particularly during the early morning and late evening hours when shadows played across the carved faces. Dr. Matsumoto's preliminary report, filed with the Hawaiian State Archaeological Division in September 1962, described the find as anomalous artifacts of unknown cultural origin requiring extensive further study. However, within weeks of submitting his report, Dr. Matsumoto received instructions from university administrators to cease excavation activities at the site and to relocate his geological survey to other areas of the island. The official reason given was budget constraints and scheduling conflicts, but colleagues noted that Dr. Matsumoto seemed unusually reluctant to discuss the matter. The 17 stone heads were transported to a storage facility at the University of Hawaii, where they remained for nearly 2 years before disappearing entirely from the archaeological record. Dr. Matsumoto's field notes and photographs from the excavation were reportedly lost in a fire that destroyed part of the university's geology department archives in 1964. The only remaining evidence of the discovery consisted of a handful of unofficial photographs taken by graduate students and Dr. Matsumoto's original site survey maps, which showed the precise GPS coordinates of the Valley of Whispers excavation. Attempts by independent researchers to relocate the original excavation site in subsequent decades have proved surprisingly difficult. The valley, which appeared clearly marked on Dr. Matsumoto's survey maps, seems to have been affected by volcanic activity in the intervening years. Lava flows from Mauna Loa's 1975 and 1984 eruptions altered the landscape significantly, and what may have once been the Valley of Whispers is now buried beneath layers of new volcanic rock. Dr. Matsumoto himself retired from the University of Hawaii in 1968 and moved to the mainland, where he spent his remaining years working as a private geological consultant. He rarely spoke publicly about his Hawaiian research and consistently declined interviews about the 1962 discovery. When pressed by curious colleagues, he would simply state that some mysteries are best left buried and change the subject to more mundane geological matters. The mystery deepened in 1989 when construction workers building a new access road on Mauna Loa's eastern slopes reported finding what appeared to be carved stone fragments buried in volcanic soil. The fragments, roughly 6 to 8 inches in length, showed evidence of deliberate carving and appeared to be made from the same unusual basalt composition that Dr. Matsumoto had documented in his original specimens. However, by the time archaeologists arrived to investigate, the construction crew had been reassigned to other projects, and the fragments had been incorporated into the road's foundation material. Local Hawaiian elders, when asked about the area, often spoke in vague terms about places on Mauna Loa that were considered kapu, forbidden or sacred. Some mentioned ancient stories passed down through oral tradition about stone guardians that watched over certain valleys, though these tales were typically dismissed by academics as mythological rather than historical accounts. The reluctance of native Hawaiians to discuss certain areas of the island in detail has long been attributed to religious taboos and respect for ancestral burial sites. But some researchers have wondered whether these restrictions might conceal knowledge of much older civilizations. As you settle deeper into sleep tonight, consider the quiet mystery of those 17 stone faces, now lost to history and bureaucratic oversight, somewhere in storage facilities or private collections, or perhaps buried again beneath Hawaiian soil. Those ancient carved heads with their hollow, watching eyes remain silent about the civilization that created them and the reasons they were placed in that remote valley so many centuries ago. The Vanishing Research Team. When scientists disappear tonight, we continue our sleepy exploration of Hawaii's hidden archaeological mysteries with the curious case of the 1978 expedition that simply vanished from the historical record. Dr. Margaret Chen, a respected anthropologist from Berkeley, led what was supposed to be a 3-month study of pre-Polynesian settlement patterns in the Hawaiian Islands. Her team of 6 researchers entered the field in March 1978 and were scheduled to return in June. They never did. The expedition had been privately funded by the Polynesian Research Foundation, an organization established by wealthy philanthropist Harrison Blackwood III, who had developed an intense interest in Pacific archaeology following his retirement from the shipping industry. Blackwood had read Dr. Matsumoto's suppressed reports about the Valley of Whispers discovery and was determined to fund further investigation into what he believed might be evidence of a lost Pacific civilization. Dr. Chen's team included specialists in various fields: Dr. James Morrison, a geologist; Dr. Sarah Kim, an expert in Pacific Island linguistics; graduate students Peter Walsh and Maria Santos; and most notably, Dr. Robert Kamehameha, a native Hawaiian archaeologist who claimed his family's oral traditions contained references to the old ones who came before the ancestors. Dr. Kamehameha had spent years collecting fragmentary stories from elderly Hawaiians about pre-Polynesian inhabitants of the islands, stories that mainstream academia generally dismissed as folklore. The team's research plan was methodical and unremarkable. They intended to conduct archaeological surveys on Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, and several smaller volcanic formations, looking for evidence of human habitation predating known Polynesian settlement. They established their base camp at a site approximately 15 miles from where Dr. Matsumoto had made his 1962 discovery, though the exact location of that original find remained uncertain due to the missing documentation. For the first 6 weeks, Dr. Chun's team followed standard archaeological protocols, filing regular progress reports with both the university and the Polynesian Research Foundation. Their initial findings were routine: stone tools consistent with known Polynesian technology, fire pits, and food preparation areas dating to the expected time frame, and pottery shards that matched established cultural patterns. Nothing in their reports suggested they were encountering anything unusual or potentially controversial. The team's communications became sporadic in late April 1978. Dr. Chun's final radio transmission, received on April 28th, was brief and somewhat cryptic. Have located site matching Matsumoto descriptions. Beginning excavation of primary structure tomorrow. Will report findings within 48 hours. No further communications were received from the expedition. When the team failed to check in for over a week, Harrison Blackwood hired a helicopter pilot to conduct an aerial search of their last known location. The pilot, Captain Mike Torres, a Vietnam veteran with extensive experience in remote area searches, reported finding the team's base camp apparently abandoned but with all equipment and supplies intact. Tents remained properly erected, research materials were neatly organized, and vehicles were parked in orderly fashion. There were no signs of struggle, natural disaster, or hasty departure. Captain Torres landed at the camp and conducted a ground search of the immediate area. He found Dr. Chun's research journal lying open on a folding table, with the final entry dated April 29th. The entry was unusually brief for Dr. Chun, who typically maintained detailed daily records. The faces are watching us from below. Robert was right about the old stories. We should not have disturbed them. Planning to document everything before the entry ended mid-sentence, with the pen still lying across the page, as if Dr. Chen had been interrupted while writing. More disturbing was Captain Torres' discovery of what appeared to be an excavation site approximately half a mile from the base camp. The dig showed evidence of systematic archaeological work, carefully measured grid squares, properly labeled artifact containers, and methodical removal of soil layers. However, the excavation appeared to have been hastily abandoned. Tools lay scattered around the site, and several artifact containers had been overturned, their contents spilled across the ground. At the center of the excavation site was a partially exposed stone platform, similar in construction to the one Dr. Matsumoto had described in his suppressed 1962 report. The platform's exposed portions showed the same precisely fitted basalt blocks and sophisticated construction techniques that didn't match known Polynesian building methods. More unsettling, arranged around the platform's perimeter, were several stone heads similar to those found by Dr. Matsumoto, but in various stages of excavation, some fully exposed, others still partially buried. Captain Torres photographed the scene extensively before contacting local authorities. However, when police and Park Service personnel arrived at the site 3 days later, they found the excavation had been completely filled in with volcanic soil and rocks. The stone platform and carved heads were no longer visible, and the area had been restored to appear as natural, undisturbed terrain. The efficiency and thoroughness of this restoration work suggested significant manpower and equipment, far more than could have been accomplished by Dr. Chen's 6-person team. The official investigation into the team's disappearance was handled by the Hawaii County Police Department with assistance from the National Park Service. Their report, filed in August 1978, concluded that the research team had likely encountered an accident while conducting fieldwork in hazardous volcanic terrain, and that their remains were probably buried beneath rock slides or volcanic activity that was common in the region. The report noted the remoteness of the area and the difficulty of conducting comprehensive searches in such treacherous terrain. However, several aspects of the official conclusion seemed questionable to those familiar with the case. Dr. Chen's team were all experienced field researchers who had worked in similar terrain without incident. The weather during their final weeks had been unusually calm, with no seismic activity or volcanic events reported in their research area. Most significantly, the complete restoration of their excavation site suggested human intervention rather than natural disaster. Harrison Blackwood, unsatisfied with the official investigation, hired private investigators to continue searching for answers. These investigators uncovered several interesting details that had been omitted from the police report. Local residents in the nearest town, Volcano Village, reported seeing unusual truck activity in the area during the nights following the team's disappearance. Several witnesses described hearing heavy machinery operating in the remote volcanic regions during nighttime hours, unusual, as legitimate geological or archaeological work was typically conducted during daylight. The private investigators also discovered that Dr. Robert Kamehameha had been asking detailed questions about his family's oral traditions in the weeks leading up to the expedition. Elderly relatives reported that he had been particularly interested in stories about the sleeping guardians and the price of waking the watchers from below. These conversations had made some family members uncomfortable as they touched on spiritual beliefs that were traditionally not discussed with outsiders. Perhaps most intriguingly, the investigators found evidence that Dr. Chen's team may not have been the only researchers to disappear while investigating pre-Polynesian artifacts. In Hawaii, a review of missing persons reports dating back to the 1950s revealed at least 4 other cases of archaeologists, geologists, or amateur researchers who had vanished while working in remote areas of the Hawaiian Islands, particularly on Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea in each case. The missing persons had been investigating geological anomalies or potential archaeological sites that predated known Polynesian settlement. The Polynesian Research Foundation quietly disbanded in 1979, with Harrison Blackwood citing insurmountable research obstacles as the reason for ending his archaeological funding efforts. Blackwood himself became increasingly reclusive in his final years, rarely speaking about his brief involvement in Hawaiian archaeology. When he died in 1987, his personal papers included extensive files on Pacific archaeology, but notably absent were any documents related to Dr. Chun's expedition or the circumstances of the team's disappearance. As you drift toward sleep, imagine those 6 researchers in their final moments at the excavation site, carefully documenting their unexpected discovery before something interrupted their work forever. The stone faces they had uncovered continue their eternal watch from beneath the restored soil, patient and silent guardians of secrets that perhaps some civilizations are not meant to uncover. The manuscript of Father Miguel Santos' Spanish Secrets from 1821, our drowsy journey through Hawaii's hidden history, brings us tonight to a document that surfaced briefly in 1983, before disappearing into private collections: the personal journal of Father Miguel Santos, a Spanish missionary who visited the Hawaiian Islands in 1821. Decades before reliable historical records began documenting European observations of native Hawaiian culture. Father Santos was not an official representative of the Catholic Church, but rather a Franciscan friar who had spent most of his career working among indigenous populations in California and Mexico. In 1820, at the age of 53, he received permission from his superiors to undertake what he described as a pilgrimage of discovery to the remote islands of the Pacific, where God's work among the heathen peoples remains undone. His journal, written in archaic Spanish with occasional Latin passages, provides a unique glimpse into Hawaiian society during a period when European contact was still relatively limited. The manuscript came to light when Dr. Elena Vasquez, a historian specializing in Spanish colonial documents, was researching early Catholic missionary activities in the Pacific. She discovered Father Santos' journal among papers donated to the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley by the estate of a deceased collector who had acquired it from an unnamed source in Mexico City. Dr. Vasquez spent 2 weeks transcribing and translating the document before it was reclaimed by the collector's family, who insisted it had been donated by mistake. According to Father Santos' account, he arrived in Hawaii aboard a trading vessel in February 1821, during the final years of Kamehameha's reign. His initial observations were typical of European visitors of the period. He wrote extensively about native religious practices, social structures, and what he perceived as the spiritual needs of the Hawaiian people. However, approximately 6 weeks into his stay, Father Santos began documenting encounters that seemed to disturb him deeply. The troubling entries began when Father Santos was invited by a Hawaiian priest, whom he called Kalani, to witness certain religious ceremonies that were typically forbidden to outsiders. Kalani, who spoke some English and Spanish, learned from earlier European visitors, had developed a curiosity about Christian beliefs and hoped to engage Father Santos in theological discussions. In exchange for sharing Catholic teachings, Kalani offered to show the Spanish priest the old sacred places where the first gods still sleep in stone. Father Santos's description of their journey to these old sacred places reads like something from a fever dream. Kalani led him to remote areas of what Father Santos described as the Great Fire Mountain, presumably Mauna Loa, where they climbed through terrain that the priest found exhausting and treacherous. After 2 days of hiking, they reached what Father Santos called the Valley of the Stone Sleepers, a narrow gorge where he encountered structures that challenged his understanding of Hawaiian civilization. Today I have seen works that surely predate the arrival of these island people. Father Santos wrote on March 15, 1821, "The stone carvings bear faces unlike any among the natives I have met. Some appear almost as the faces of my own Spanish ancestors, others show the features of Oriental peoples, and still others seem to represent races unknown to me." Kalani insists these were made by the first people, who came from beneath the earth when the islands were young. Such pagan beliefs trouble me deeply, yet I cannot deny the evidence before my eyes. The priest's journal entries from this period become increasingly agitated as he described spending several days documenting the stone carvings. He sketched numerous examples of what he called devil faces carved in volcanic rock, though, unfortunately, these drawings were not among the materials Dr. Vasquez was able to examine. Father Santos seemed particularly disturbed by the eyes of the carved figures, writing that their hollow gazes seem to follow me as I work, and I find myself constantly turning to look behind me, though Kalani and I are alone in this accursed place. More unsettling were Father Santos' accounts of the sounds he heard while working in the valley. During the night hours, when we rest near these pagan monuments, I hear voices speaking in languages I do not recognize, he wrote. Kalani claims this is normal, that the old ones speak in their sleep, but such explanations only increase my conviction that we are in a place where evil spirits dwell. I have prayed continuously for protection, yet the voices continue, sometimes seeming to come from beneath the very ground where we sleep. Father Santos' journal indicates that he and Kalani spent nearly 2 weeks in the valley, during which time the priest attempted to document everything he observed. His writings suggest the site contained not just stone heads, but also carved pillars, underground chambers, and what he described as altar stones marked with symbols that bear no resemblance to the native writing I have observed elsewhere on these islands. Some of these symbols, according to Father Santos, appeared to be similar to the ancient scripts of the Orient, though written by hands that clearly understood different meanings. The priest's mounting anxiety about the site becomes evident. In his entries from late March, I begin to suspect that our presence here has awakened something that was meant to remain sleeping, he wrote on March 26th. The stone faces seem more distinct each day, as if they grow clearer and more defined the longer we remain. Kalani has become increasingly agitated, muttering in his native tongue about the price of disturbing the guardians. I fear we have committed some grave sin by violating this unholy place. Father Santos' final entries about the valley describe the hasty departure that he attributed to divine warning. On March 28th, he wrote, "Last night I dreamed that the stone faces opened their eyes and spoke to me in perfect Spanish, warning me to leave this place and never speak of what I have seen. Upon waking, I found that several of the carved heads appeared to have shifted position during the night, though Kalani insists they have not moved. Whether this was supernatural intervention or the result of my troubled mind, I cannot say, but I am convinced we must depart immediately." The priest and his guide left the valley the following morning, and Father Santos' subsequent journal entries returned to more conventional observations about Hawaiian culture and society. However, he makes several cryptic references to feeling watched by unseen eyes and experiencing recurring nightmares about stone guardians who demand silence. His entries also suggest that Kalani had made him promise never to reveal the location of the valley to other Europeans, a promise that Father Santos seemed to take very seriously. Father Santos departed Hawaii in May 1821, returning to California, where he resumed his work among Native American populations. His journal entries from this later period occasionally reference his Hawaiian experiences, but always in vague terms. He writes about feeling burdened by secrets that must remain hidden and expressing concern that some knowledge is too dangerous for Christian souls to possess. The priest's final years were marked by increasing reclusiveness and what his fellow friars described as periods of severe melancholy. He died in 1834 at a monastery in Santa Barbara, California, reportedly while burning a collection of personal papers that he claimed contained drawings and writings that should not survive me. The only record of his Hawaiian experiences that survived was the journal that Dr. Vasquez discovered more than 150 years later. When Dr. Vasquez attempted to research Father Santos' background, she found surprisingly little documentation of his life and career. Church records from the period contained only basic information about his assignments and duties, with no mention of his unauthorized journey to Hawaii. More puzzling, when she tried to contact the family who had reclaimed the journal, she discovered that the donor's estate had no record of owning such a document, and the family insisted they had never authorized its release to the library. As you settle into sleep tonight, consider Father Santos alone in that remote valley, sketching stone faces by candlelight while ancient voices whispered in languages no living person could understand. The priest's burden of keeping dangerous secrets joins the growing list of those who encountered Hawaii's hidden history and learned, perhaps too late, that some mysteries carry a price for those who disturb them. The Blackwood Files: Industrial Secrets and Missing Cargo tonight. Our sleepy investigation takes us into the shadowy world of industrial archaeology, where shipping magnate Harrison Blackwood III's obsession with Hawaiian mysteries led him down a path of corporate secrecy and carefully concealed expeditions. Long before he funded Dr. Chun's ill-fated 1978 research team, Blackwood had been using his considerable resources and maritime connections to quietly investigate the Pacific's archaeological anomalies. Blackwood inherited Blackwood Shipping Corporation from his father in 1954 at the age of 32. The company operated a fleet of cargo vessels throughout the Pacific, with regular routes connecting California, Hawaii, and various Asian ports. What made Blackwood unusual among industrial magnates was his academic background. He held degrees in both business, administration, and anthropology from Stanford University, and had originally planned to pursue archaeological research before family obligations drew him into the shipping business. The first indication of Blackwood's unusual interests appeared in company records from 1961, when Blackwood Shipping began incorporating extended stops in Hawaiian ports that seemed unnecessary for normal cargo operations. Internal memos from this period, which surfaced decades later during corporate restructuring, show that Blackwood had instructed his ship captains to allow extra time for what he called geological surveys and cultural research activities during Hawaiian port calls. Captain William Jang, who commanded several Blackwood vessels during the 1960s, later recalled receiving unusual orders from the company's head office. Mr. Blackwood would sometimes request that we delay departure from Honolulu or Hilo by several days. Captain Jang told researchers in 1992 he'd explained that company personnel needed to conduct mineral surveys or archaeological assessments on various islands. We were instructed to not discuss these activities with port authorities or include them in our official logs. More intriguing were the special cargo manifests that began appearing in Blackwood shipping records from 1962 onward. These manifests listed shipments of geological specimens and cultural artifacts being transported from Hawaii to private storage facilities in California. The shipments were always small, rarely more than a few tons, but they were handled with unusual security measures. Captain Zhang recalled that these particular cargo items were always loaded and unloaded by Blackwood's personal employees, never by regular dock workers, and were stored in specially secured cargo holds during transport. Company financial records from this period show regular payments to several individuals whose job descriptions were vaguely listed as Pacific Research consultants. Among these was Dr. Harold Matsumoto, the geologist who had made the original 1962 discovery of stoneheads on Mauna Loa. Payment records indicate that Dr. Matsumoto received monthly consulting fees from Blackwood, shipping from 1963 until 1968, despite having no apparent role in maritime operations. Another regular recipient of Blackwood payments was a Hawaiian man named Robert Kamehameha Sr., father of the archaeologist who would later disappear with Dr. Chun's research team. The elder Kamehameha was listed in company records as a cultural liaison specialist, though his actual duties were never clearly defined. Payment records suggest he received substantial compensation for what appeared to be part-time work, leading some researchers to speculate that he was being paid for his knowledge of traditional Hawaiian sites rather than for any actual services. In 1965, Blackwood established a subsidiary company called Pacific Heritage Research, ostensibly to conduct archaeological and geological surveys throughout the Pacific Islands. The company maintained offices in Honolulu and San Francisco, but operated with unusual secrecy for an academic research organization. Pacific Heritage Research never published findings in academic journals, never participated in archaeological conferences, and maintained no public relations or educational outreach programs. Employee records from Pacific Heritage Research reveal a small but highly specialized staff. Dr. Margaret Chen, the anthropologist who would later lead the 1978 expedition, worked as a part-time consultant for the company from 1966 to 1970. Dr. Sarah Kim, the linguist who would disappear with Chun's team, was also a Pacific Heritage Research employee during the late 1960s. Most of the researchers who would eventually join Chun's fatal expedition had some prior connection to Blackwood's research subsidiary. The company's activities became even more secretive following a 1967 incident that was barely documented in official records. A Blackwood shipping vessel, the SS Polynesian Explorer, was reportedly damaged during cargo operations at Hilo Harbor when a piece of heavy equipment fell through the ship's deck. The accident was officially attributed to mechanical failure of the loading crane, but eyewitness accounts suggested something more unusual had occurred. Dock worker Miguel Santos, no relation to the Spanish priest, was present during the incident and provided a statement to investigators that was later sealed by port authorities. According to Santos, the cargo being loaded when the accident occurred consisted of several large stone objects wrapped in heavy canvas. They were loading what looked like big carved rocks, Santos told investigators. When the canvas tore, I could see they had faces carved on them, like statues or something. But when the crane cable snapped and dropped the load, those stone heads just disappeared through the deck like it was made of paper. The official accident report stated that the cargo had fallen through damaged deck plating into the ship's lower hold, but when salvage crews examined the vessel, they found no trace of the missing cargo. The Polynesian Explorer's cargo hold showed a circular hole approximately 8 feet in diameter, that extended completely through the ship's hull to the harbor floor, yet the vessel remained seaworthy and showed no signs of taking on water. Harbor divers who searched the area found no trace of the lost cargo on the ocean bottom. Following this incident, Blackwood Shipping's Hawaiian operations became even more circumspect. Cargo manifests from subsequent years show continued shipments of geological specimens, but these were now loaded exclusively during nighttime hours and transported on smaller vessels that avoided major ports. Captain Jong recalled receiving instructions to use remote loading points along Hawaii's less populated coastlines, often requiring cargo transfers in areas with no proper dock facilities. Blackwood's personal involvement in these operations became increasingly direct during the early 1970s. Company executives reported that he began making frequent trips to Hawaii, sometimes staying for weeks at a time while personally overseeing what he described as critical research activities. His behavior during this period struck associates as obsessive and secretive. Former company vice president Thomas Morrison recalled that Blackwood had become paranoid about industrial espionage and insisted that all documents related to Pacific heritage research be stored in a private safe at his Palo Alto residence. The shipping magnate's obsession seemed to reach a crescendo in the mid-1970s. When company records show, he began investing heavily in specialized equipment for what he called deep extraction projects. Purchase orders from this period include heavy-duty excavation machinery, industrial lighting systems, and various pieces of geological survey equipment. Most unusually, Blackwood also acquired several pieces of military surplus equipment, including portable radio communications systems and what appeared to be electronic detection devices. Company financial records indicate that by 1977, Blackwood had spent over $2 million on Pacific heritage research operations, a substantial sum that was straining the shipping company's resources. Board members began questioning these expenditures, particularly since the research subsidiary produced no visible results or revenue. Internal memos from this period show increasing tension between Blackwood and his company's other executives, who were concerned about the impact of his archaeological obsession on normal business operations. It was in this context that Blackwood made his decision to fund Dr. Chen's 1978 expedition, which he apparently viewed as a final attempt to solve the mysteries that had consumed him for nearly 2 decades. When that expedition ended in disaster, Blackwood's relationship with his own company became increasingly strained. Board minutes from late 1978 show heated discussions about Blackwood's reckless pursuit of non-commercial research objectives and his apparent inability to distinguish between business responsibilities and personal interests. As you drift towards sleep, imagine Harrison Blackwood in his Palo Alto office, surrounded by shipping charts and archaeological reports, planning another midnight cargo operation to transport mysterious stone artifacts from Hawaii's remote shores. His industrial empire built on the systematic movement of ordinary goods, yet increasingly devoted to concealing extraordinary cargo that perhaps should never have been disturbed from its ancient resting places. The Honolulu Harbor Incident Coast Guard reports and vanishing evidence tonight. We drift into the murky waters of maritime mysteries, where routine Coast Guard patrols encountered evidence that challenged their understanding of what lay beneath Hawaii's coastal waters. The incident at Honolulu Harbor in 1982 became one of the most thoroughly documented and systematically suppressed maritime anomalies in Pacific Coast Guard history. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell had been stationed at the Honolulu Coast Guard facility for 3 years when she received what appeared to be a routine Assignment in September 1982. Harbor authorities had reported unusual sonar readings during routine depth surveys of Honolulu Harbor's main shipping channel, and the Coast Guard was requested to investigate potential navigational hazards that might affect commercial vessel traffic. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell assembled a standard survey team consisting of herself, Chief Petty Officer David Chen, and two junior enlisted personnel trained in underwater detection equipment. Their vessel, the Coast Guard cutter Vigilant, was equipped with advanced sonar mapping systems and underwater photography equipment that represented the most sophisticated maritime survey technology available at the time. The initial sonar sweeps of the harbor's eastern shipping channel revealed what appeared to be a large structural anomaly resting on the harbor floor at a depth of approximately 60 feet. The object showed clear geometric patterns that suggested artificial construction rather than natural rock formations or typical maritime debris. Most puzzling was the object's size. Sonar readings indicated a structure roughly 200 feet in length and 80 feet in width, far larger than any known shipwreck or harbor infrastructure. Chief Petty Officer Chen, who had extensive experience in underwater salvage operations, immediately recognized that the sonar readings showed something unusual. The acoustic signature was unlike anything I'd encountered in 20 years of marine survey work. He later wrote in his official report, "The object appeared to be constructed of extremely dense material, possibly stone or concrete, but with surface features that were too regular and symmetrical to be natural formations." Lieutenant Commander Mitchell authorized a comprehensive photographic survey using the Coast Guard's remotely operated underwater vehicle, ROV. The initial ROV descent, conducted on September 15, 1982, produced footage that would later become the subject of intense scrutiny and eventual classification by naval intelligence authorities. The underwater video revealed a massive stone platform, constructed of precisely fitted blocks, each approximately 6 feet square and showing evidence of sophisticated engineering techniques. The platform appeared to be part of a larger complex that extended beyond the range of the ROV's lights and cameras. Most striking were the numerous carved stone heads, similar to Easter Island moai, but smaller in scale, that were positioned around the platform's perimeter in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. What made the discovery particularly unsettling was the excellent state of preservation of the carved figures. Despite being submerged in salt water for an unknown period, the stone heads showed remarkably sharp detail and showed no evidence of marine growth or corrosion that would be expected from long-term underwater exposure. Several of the heads appeared to have been carved with hollow eye sockets that created an optical illusion of watching the approaching ROF camera. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's initial report, filed on September 18, 1982, described the discovery as a significant archaeological site of unknown cultural origin, requiring immediate attention from appropriate academic and cultural authorities. She recommended that the site be carefully documented and turned over to University of Hawaii researchers for proper archaeological investigation. However, within 48 hours of filing her report, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell received orders from Coast Guard District Command to suspend all survey activities at the site pending security review by appropriate federal agencies. She was instructed to submit all photographic materials, sonar recordings, and written documentation to district headquarters for evaluation by specialized personnel with relevant expertise. The security review was conducted by a joint team that included representatives from Naval Intelligence, the National Security Agency, and what appeared to be civilian contractors whose organizational affiliations were not disclosed to Coast Guard personnel. The review team spent 3 days examining the Coast Guard's documentation and interviewing all personnel who had participated in the survey operations. Chief Petty Officer Chen later described the interview process as unusually intense for what should have been a routine archaeological discovery. They asked very specific questions about exactly what we had observed, whether we had discussed our findings with anyone outside the Coast Guard, and whether we understood the importance of maintaining operational security regarding sensitive discoveries, he recalled. The tone of the questioning suggested they were treating this as a matter of national security rather than academic interest. Following the security review, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was informed that the underwater site had been classified as a sensitive naval facility, and that all future access would be restricted to authorized personnel with appropriate security clearances. The site was designated as a navigational hazard area, and commercial vessels were instructed to avoid the eastern shipping channel until further notice. More troubling was the fate of the documentary evidence that the Coast Guard team had collected. All photographic materials, video recordings, and sonar data were transferred to federal custody and classified under provisions of the National Security Act. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and her team were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that prohibited them from discussing their discoveries with unauthorized personnel, including their own families and Coast Guard colleagues. The classification of the site as a sensitive naval facility created an effective barrier to any civilian research or investigation. University of Hawaii archaeologists who inquired about the discovery were told that the site contained strategic military installations that could not be accessed for security reasons. Journalists who attempted to investigate the story were informed that no such discovery had been made and that rumors of underwater archaeological sites were unfounded. Despite these official denials, evidence of the harbor discovery continued to surface through unofficial channels. Harbor pilots and commercial divers who worked in Honolulu Harbor reported observing unusual underwater structures during routine operations. Several described seeing carved stone heads and ancient-looking platforms in areas that were officially designated as empty water. Independent diver Marcus Wang, who operated a marine salvage business in Honolulu, attempted to photograph the site in 1984 using his own equipment. Wang reported that he was intercepted by Coast Guard vessels before reaching the restricted area and was warned that he would face federal prosecution if he attempted to access the site. Again, his diving equipment was temporarily confiscated and returned only after he signed a statement agreeing to avoid the area in the future. The effectiveness of the site's security was demonstrated in 1985 when a commercial fishing vessel accidentally deployed nets in the restricted area. The fishing crew reported that their nets became entangled with what they described as carved stone structures on the harbor floor. Coast Guard vessels responded within minutes, and the fishing crew was escorted to shore where they were detained for several hours while their catch and equipment were thoroughly inspected. Perhaps most significantly, the harbor site appeared to be connected to a larger network of underwater anomalies throughout the Hawaiian island chain. Coast Guard records from the 1980s, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, contain references to similar discoveries at Hilo Harbor, Kahului Harbor, and several smaller ports throughout the islands. In each case, the discoveries were quickly classified and removed from public access. Following the same pattern established with the Honolulu Harbor incident, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell completed her tour of duty in Hawaii in 1984 and was transferred to a Coast Guard facility in Alaska, where she spent the remainder of her career conducting routine maritime safety operations. She never again participated in underwater archaeological surveys and consistently declined to discuss her experiences in Hawaii when approached by researchers or journalists. Chief Petty Officer Chen retired from the Coast Guard in 1986 and moved to the mainland, where he worked as a civilian marine surveyor until his death in 2003. The long-term impact of the Honolulu Harbor incident extended beyond the immediate suppression of archaeological evidence. Coast Guard procedures for handling unusual discoveries were modified to include mandatory consultation with federal intelligence agencies before any documentation could be released to civilian authorities. This policy change ensured that future discoveries of potentially sensitive archaeological sites would be quickly removed from public scrutiny as you drift toward sleep. Imagine those stone heads resting silently on the harbor floor, their hollow eyes staring upward through 60 feet of dark water toward the ships passing overhead. The Mauna Kea Observatory Incident Astronomical Observations and Bureaucratic Silence Hour. Sleepy journey through Hawaii's hidden history ascends tonight to the summit of Mauna Kea, where the world's most sophisticated astronomical instruments occasionally detect phenomena that challenge our understanding of both the cosmos and the ground beneath the telescopes themselves. The incident at the Keck Observatory in 1989 remains one of the most thoroughly documented yet officially ignored anomalies in modern astronomical research. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez joined the staff of the W.M. Keck Observatory in 1988, shortly after completing her doctorate in astrophysics at Caltech. As a newly appointed research associate, her primary responsibility was conducting infrared observations of distant galaxies. Using the observatory's advanced spectrographic equipment, the work was routine but precisely what she had trained for. Methodical analysis of electromagnetic radiation from objects billions of light years away. What Dr. Rodriguez had not expected was that her most significant discovery would come from much closer to home. On the evening of March 15, 1989, while calibrating the observatory's infrared detection systems, she noticed unusual thermal signatures emanating from areas of Mauna Kea's volcanic slopes that showed no visible signs of geological activity. The thermal anomalies appeared as distinct geometric patterns visible in infrared wavelengths but completely invisible to conventional optical observation. Dr. Rodriguez initially assumed she was observing some form of volcanic venting or underground lava flow activity, but the patterns were far too regular and symmetrical to represent natural geological processes. Instead, the thermal signatures formed what appeared to be large, rectangular, and circular shapes, arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate construction. Dr. Rodriguez spent several nights documenting these thermal anomalies, using the observatory's sophisticated imaging equipment to create detailed maps of the underground heat sources. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be an extensive network of heated structures extending throughout the volcanic mountain's interior. The structures seemed to follow a logical architectural plan, with larger central chambers connected by smaller corridors and subsidiary rooms. Most puzzling was the consistency of the thermal output from these underground structures. Unlike natural volcanic activity, which typically shows significant variation in temperature and intensity over time, the anomalous heat sources maintained steady thermal signatures night after night. This consistency suggested either an artificial heat source or geological processes unlike anything previously documented in volcanic research. Dr. Rodriguez shared her preliminary findings with Dr. Michael Tanaka, the observatory's senior infrared specialist, who initially expressed skepticism about her interpretations. However, when Dr. Tanaka examined the data himself, he was forced to acknowledge that the thermal patterns were indeed highly unusual and warranted further investigation. The two astronomers began conducting systematic infrared surveys of Mauna Kea's entire volcanic structure, using the observatory's equipment during periods when it was not needed for astronomical observations. Over the course of several weeks, they documented thermal anomalies covering an area of approximately 15 square miles, all showing the same geometric patterns and consistent heat output that characterized Dr. Rodriguez's original discovery. Their work attracted the attention of Dr. Janet Kim, a geologist from the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, who was consulted about the possible geological explanations for the thermal anomalies. Dr. Kim's analysis of the infrared data led her to conclude that the heat sources were almost certainly artificial in nature, as they showed none of the characteristics associated with natural volcanic or geothermal activity. The three scientists began preparing a comprehensive research paper documenting their findings, which they planned to submit to both astronomical and geological journals. Their draft manuscript, titled Infrared Evidence for Subsurface Artificial Structures in Mauna Kea Volcanic Complex, included detailed thermal imaging data and analysis that strongly suggested the presence of an extensive underground facility of unknown origin and purpose. However, before their research could be published, the team encountered significant institutional resistance. Dr. Patricia Chen, the observatory's director, informed them that their use of astronomical equipment for geological research had exceeded the scope of their authorized activities, and that all further investigation of the thermal anomalies must cease immediately. More seriously, representatives from the U.S. Geological Survey arrived at the observatory in April 1989 to conduct what they described as a routine review of research activities and equipment usage. The USGS team spent several days examining the infrared data collected by Dr. Rodriguez and her colleagues, and ultimately concluded that the thermal signatures were the result of equipment calibration, errors, and misinterpretation of natural volcanic processes. The USGS review team's conclusions struck the observatory staff as scientifically unjustified, particularly since the thermal anomalies had been consistently documented using multiple pieces of equipment over extended time periods. Dr. Tanaka, who had 20 years of experience in infrared astronomy, publicly disputed the USGS findings and insisted that the thermal signatures were far too consistent and geometrically regular to represent equipment malfunctions. The controversy escalated when Dr. Rodriguez attempted to submit her research paper to the Journal of Volcanology and Geothermal Research, despite institutional pressure to abandon the project. The journal's editorial review process was unusually lengthy, with the manuscript being sent to multiple reviewers who raised increasingly technical objections to the research methodology and conclusions. After 6 months of review, the journal ultimately rejected the paper on the grounds that the extraordinary claims made by the authors require extraordinary evidence, which has not been adequately provided. This rejection was particularly surprising, given that the manuscript included extensive quantitative data and had been prepared according to standard scientific publication formats. Dr. Rodriguez's attempts to publish her findings in alternative venues met with similar resistance. Astronomical journals deemed the research outside their scope of interest, while geological publications questioned the author's expertise in volcanic research. The scientific community's reluctance to engage with the findings effectively prevented the research from entering the academic literature. More troubling developments began occurring in late 1989, when Dr. Rodriguez's access to the observatory's infrared equipment was increasingly restricted. she was informed that new protocols required advance approval for any research activities not directly related to astronomical observations, and her requests for equipment time were consistently denied due to scheduling conflicts and maintenance requirements. The situation became untenable in early 1990 when Dr. Rodriguez was informed that her research associate position would not be renewed for the following year. The official reason given was reorganization of research priorities and budget constraints. But colleagues noted that less experienced researchers with weaker publication records were retained while Dr. Rodriguez was let go. Dr. Rodriguez left Hawaii in 1990 and took a position at a small observatory in Arizona, where she returned to conventional astronomical research and never again attempted to investigate terrestrial thermal anomalies. Dr. Tanaka continued working at the Keck Observatory, but was reassigned to projects that did not involve infrared imaging of terrestrial targets. Dr. Kim returned to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, where she focused her research on conventional volcanic monitoring activities. The long-term impact of the incident extended beyond the immediate suppression of the research findings. New policies were implemented at the Keck Observatory requiring advance approval from both institutional administrators and federal agencies before astronomical equipment could be used for any research involving terrestrial targets. These policies effectively prevented future astronomers from accidentally discovering similar anomalies while conducting routine equipment calibrations. Perhaps most significantly, the thermal signatures that Dr. Rodriguez had documented appeared to diminish in intensity during the months following the USGS investigation. By 1991, infrared surveys of Mauna Kea conducted by other researchers showed no evidence of the geometric thermal patterns that had been so clearly visible in 1989. Whether this change represented the natural cessation of whatever processes had created the anomalies, or the result of deliberate intervention to eliminate the heat sources, remains unclear. The Mauna Kea incident established a pattern that would be repeated at other major observatories when astronomers accidentally detected terrestrial anomalies during routine observations. In each case, the discoveries were quickly investigated by federal agencies. The findings were disputed or suppressed, and the responsible researchers found their careers redirected away from sensitive areas of investigation. The Naval Intelligence Assessment Military Perspectives on Archaeological Anomalist Night. Our drowsy investigation descends into the shadowy realm of military intelligence, where classified assessments of Hawaiian archaeological anomalies reveal a decades-long effort to understand and contain discoveries that pose potential threats to national security. The Naval Intelligence Assessment of 1991, partially declassified in 2018, provides our clearest glimpse into how military authorities have approached the persistent mystery of pre-Polynesian Hawaiian civilization. Commander Robert Hayes of the Office of Naval Intelligence had spent most of his career analyzing Soviet submarine capabilities and Pacific Fleet deployment strategies when he received an unusual assignment in 1990, following a series of incidents involving civilian discovery of anomalous archaeological sites throughout the Hawaiian Islands. ONI had been tasked with conducting a comprehensive threat assessment of what internal documents referred to as the Hawaiian archaeological problem. Commander Hayes was chosen for this assignment, partly because of his analytical background, and partly because he had no prior involvement with Hawaiian archaeological issues, ensuring an objective perspective on what had become an increasingly complex intelligence matter. His team included specialists in archaeology, geology, linguistics, and cultural anthropology, all holding appropriate security clearances for handling classified materials related to national security concerns. The ONI assessment team's first task was reviewing all existing military and civilian documentation related to anomalous Hawaiian archaeological discoveries dating back to the 1940s. This review revealed a pattern of incidents that was far more extensive than any single agency had previously recognized. Coast Guard reports, Army Corps of Engineers surveys, Air Force radar anomalies, and civilian researcher findings all pointed to the existence of widespread pre-Polynesian archaeological sites throughout the Hawaiian island chain. What emerged from this comprehensive review was evidence of a sophisticated, ancient civilization that appeared to have occupied the Hawaiian Islands for an extended period before the arrival of Polynesian settlers. Carbon dating evidence, when compiled from multiple sources, suggested human habitation beginning as early as 500 CE and possibly extending back several centuries further. The technological capabilities demonstrated by this civilization included advanced stoneworking techniques, precision engineering, and construction methods that exceeded known Polynesian capabilities. More troubling from a national security perspective was evidence that this ancient civilization had possessed knowledge of astronomical phenomena and navigational techniques that seemed inconsistent with the technological level typically associated with Pacific Island cultures. Stone carvings documented by various researchers showed sophisticated understanding of stellar movements, seasonal variations, and geographic relationships that suggested contact with advanced civilizations from outside the Pacific region. Commander Hayes' team also reviewed the extensive documentation of efforts to suppress civilian research into these archaeological anomalies. The pattern of academic suppression, career destruction, and institutional cover-ups revealed a coordinated effort spanning multiple federal agencies and civilian institutions. However, this review also highlighted the limitations of suppression strategies. Despite decades of effort, civilian researchers continued to encounter evidence of pre-Polynesian civilization, and each new discovery required increasingly elaborate containment measures. The ONI assessment identified several specific national security concerns related to the Hawaiian archaeological anomalies. First, the existence of sophisticated pre-Polynesian civilization raised questions about current understanding of Pacific prehistory and the reliability of existing historical and anthropological frameworks. If fundamental assumptions about Pacific settlement patterns were incorrect, this could affect military planning and intelligence assessments throughout the Pacific region. Second, the advanced technological capabilities demonstrated by the ancient Hawaiian civilization suggested possible contact with civilizations from outside the Pacific, including potentially Asian or even European cultures during periods when such contact was not supposed to have occurred according to accepted historical time. This raised concerns about gaps in intelligence regarding early trans-Pacific cultural and technological exchange. Most significantly, the ONI assessment identified what it termed the infrastructure problem. Many of the discovered archaeological sites appeared to include extensive underground chambers, tunnel systems, and structural complexes that extended far beyond surface features. Infrared satellite surveys conducted by military intelligence had detected thermal anomalies consistent with large underground facilities throughout the Hawaiian Islands, including areas near critical military installations. The possibility that extensive underground structures of unknown purpose existed beneath Hawaii's military bases posed obvious security concerns. If these structures were accessible through hidden entrances or connected by tunnel systems, they could potentially provide concealment for hostile activities or unauthorized access to sensitive military areas. The ancient origin of these structures made them particularly difficult to secure, as they predated all modern military installations and security protocols. Commander Hayes' team also examined the curious pattern of personnel who had encountered Hawaiian archaeological anomalies, subsequently experiencing career difficulties or becoming unavailable for further research. This pattern included not only civilian researchers but also military personnel who would be involved in discovery or documentation of anomalous sites. The assessment noted that this pattern suggested either systematic career targeting or voluntary withdrawal from sensitive research areas by individuals who had learned information they were not comfortable possessing. The ONI assessment's most classified section dealt with what it termed active site management. This section, which remains heavily redacted even in declassified versions, apparently described ongoing military activities at various Hawaiian archaeological sites, references to containment protocols, site monitoring systems, and access control measures suggest that military authorities had implemented comprehensive security measures at locations where significant archaeological anomalies had been discovered. One particularly intriguing aspect of the assessment was its discussion of technological analysis of artifacts recovered from various sites. The document references attempts to understand the engineering techniques and materials used in ancient Hawaiian construction projects, with particular attention to methods that exceeded known technological capabilities of Pacific Island cultures. Some sections suggest that certain artifacts had been subjected to detailed laboratory analysis by military research facilities. The assessment's conclusions, while heavily redacted, appear to recommend continued suppression of civilian research. Combined with expanded military investigation of the archaeological sites, the document emphasizes the importance of preventing unauthorized access to underground structures while conducting careful analysis of ancient technological capabilities that might have applications for modern military purposes. Perhaps most revealing is the assessment's discussion of cultural sensitivity protocols. The document acknowledges that suppression efforts must be carefully managed to avoid appearing to disrespect native Hawaiian cultural concerns. The strategy involves presenting archaeological suppression as protection of sacred sites, rather than concealment of potentially sensitive discoveries, thereby enlisting native Hawaiian support for restricting access to anomalous archaeological areas. The ONI assessment also addressed the long-term sustainability of suppression strategies. The document notes that civilian technological capabilities, particularly in areas such as ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging, were making it increasingly difficult to conceal large archaeological sites. The assessment recommends developing more sophisticated cover stories and alternative explanations for discoveries that could no longer be completely suppressed. Commander Hayes completed his assessment in 1991 and was subsequently transferred to a position analyzing Pacific Fleet logistics, well away from any further involvement with Hawaiian archaeological issues. The assessment's recommendations were apparently implemented, as subsequent decades saw increasingly sophisticated efforts to manage civilian discovery of archaeological anomalies while expanding military investigation of the sites. The partial declassification of the ONI assessment in 2018 revealed only a fraction of its contents. But even the redacted sections provide insight into the military's recognition that Hawaiian archaeological anomalies represent a significant and ongoing intelligence concern. The document's matter-of-fact treatment of pre-Polynesian civilization and its technological capabilities suggests that military authorities have long accepted the reality of discoveries that remain officially denied in civilian academic circles. The digital age discovery, modern technology meets ancient mysteries. Tonight, our sleepy exploration ventures into the digital age, where satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have made it increasingly difficult to keep ancient secrets buried. The 2003 discovery by Google Earth researchers marked a turning point in the Hawaiian archaeological mystery, demonstrating how modern technology could reveal patterns that had been hidden for decades of careful suppression. Dr. Kevin Martinez was not looking for archaeological anomalies when he began his analysis of Hawaiian satellite imagery in 2003. As a graduate student in geography at UCLA, he was using newly available Google Earth data to study volcanic formation patterns for his dissertation on Pacific Island geology. His interest was purely academic, documenting how volcanic activity had shaped the topography of the Hawaiian island chain over geological time periods. However, as Dr. Martinez systematically examined higher resolution satellite images of Hawaii's volcanic regions, he began noticing geometric patterns in the landscape that seemed inconsistent with natural geological processes. These patterns were subtle and would have been invisible to ground-based observers. But from the orbital perspective of satellite imagery, they formed clear and unmistakable shapes. The patterns appeared as slight variations in vegetation color and density that outlined rectangular and circular shapes across large areas of Hawaii's volcanic slopes. Dr. Martinez initially assumed these were the result of modern human activity, perhaps old agricultural terraces or abandoned construction projects that had been reclaimed by natural vegetation. However, the scale and distribution of the patterns suggested something far more extensive than any known historical land use. Using image analysis software, Dr. Martinez began mapping the geometric patterns he observed in the satellite data. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be a vast network of buried structures extending throughout the Hawaiian Islands. The patterns were most clearly visible on Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea, but similar formations could be detected on virtually all of the major Hawaiian islands. The buried structures showed evidence of sophisticated planning and engineering. Large rectangular compounds were connected by linear features that resembled roads or pathways, while circular formations appeared to be positioned at strategic intervals throughout the network. The overall layout suggested urban planning on a scale that far exceeded any known pre-contact Hawaiian settlement patterns. Dr. Martinez shared his preliminary findings with his dissertation advisor, Dr. Susan Chen, no relation to the anthropologist who had disappeared in 1978, who encouraged him to expand his analysis using more sophisticated remote sensing techniques. They obtained access to infrared satellite data and ground-penetrating radar surveys that had been conducted for various government agencies, hoping to gain additional insight into the subsurface structures. The infrared satellite data revealed thermal signatures that confirmed the presence of extensive underground chambers and tunnel systems throughout the areas where geometric patterns had been observed in visible light imagery. The thermal patterns showed the same geometric regularity that characterized the surface vegetation anomalies, suggesting that the buried structures extended deep underground and covered much larger areas than were visible from surface indicators. Alone, ground-penetrating radar data obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests from various federal agencies provided even more detailed information about the subsurface structures. The radar surveys showed evidence of stone construction using precisely fitted blocks, chambers with dimensions that exceeded anything known from Polynesian architecture, and tunnel systems that connected sites separated by many miles of volcanic terrain. What made Dr. Martinez's findings particularly significant was their systematic nature. Unlike previous discoveries that had been limited to individual sites or small areas, the satellite analysis revealed that the anomalous structures formed an integrated network that spanned the entire Hawaiian island chain. The scale and sophistication of this network suggested a civilization that had possessed organizational capabilities and technological resources far beyond anything associated with traditional Pacific Island cultures. Dr. Martinez began preparing a comprehensive research paper documenting his satellite analysis and its implications for understanding Hawaiian prehistory. His draft manuscript included detailed maps showing the locations of anomalous structures, analysis of their architectural characteristics, and speculation about the civilization that might have created such an extensive network of underground facilities. However, Dr. Martinez's research attracted attention from unexpected quarters before he could complete his academic publication. In late 2003, he was contacted by representatives from the National Reconnaissance Office, who informed him that his research involved analysis of classified satellite imagery and that continued investigation would require appropriate security clearances. The NRO representatives explained that some of the satellite data Dr. Martinez had been using in his research was considered sensitive for national security reasons, and that his findings could not be published without prior review by appropriate federal agencies, while the imagery he had accessed through Google Earth was publicly available. His analysis, techniques, and conclusions had apparently identified patterns that were considered classified information. Dr. Martinez was required to submit all of his research materials for security review, including his image analysis software, processed satellite data, and draft manuscript. The review process took several months, during which time he was prohibited from discussing his findings with anyone, including his dissertation advisor and fellow graduate students. When the security review was completed in mid-2004, Dr. Martinez was informed that his research could not be published in its current form due to national security considerations and protection of sensitive intelligence capabilities. He was offered the opportunity to revise his dissertation to focus on conventional geological topics that did not involve analysis of potentially sensitive landscape features. The experience of having his research classified and suppressed proved deeply troubling for Dr. Martinez, who had not intended to investigate anything related to national security. He ultimately decided to abandon his original dissertation topic and instead wrote a conventional study of volcanic soil composition that avoided any analysis of potentially sensitive satellite imagery. Dr. Martinez completed his graduate degree in 2005 and took a position with a private environmental consulting firm, where he worked on routine geological surveys and environmental impact assessments. He never again attempted to conduct research involving satellite analysis of Hawaiian landscape features and consistently declined to discuss his graduate school experiences when approached by other researchers or journalists. However, Dr. Martinez's suppressed research had an indirect impact that extended far beyond his individual case. Word of his discoveries spread through informal networks of researchers interested in Hawaiian archaeological anomalies, and several other scientists began conducting their own analysis of publicly available satellite imagery to verify his findings. These follow-up investigations, conducted by researchers working independently and using different analytical techniques, largely confirmed Dr. Martinez's observations about geometric patterns in Hawaiian landscape features. However, each researcher who attempted to publish findings related to these patterns encountered similar suppression efforts from federal agencies, claiming national security concerns. The pattern of suppression became so consistent that researchers began developing informal communication networks to share information about Hawaiian archaeological anomalies without triggering official attention. These networks operated through encrypted email lists, private websites, and small academic conferences that focused on alternative interpretations of Pacific prehistory. One particularly significant development was the emergence of citizen science projects that encouraged amateur researchers to conduct their own analysis of satellite imagery using freely available tools and data. These projects operated on the principle that widespread public participation in research would make systematic suppression more difficult, as federal agencies could not easily prevent hundreds of independent researchers from analyzing publicly available information. The citizen science approach proved partially successful in documenting the extent of Hawaiian archaeological anomalies, but it also demonstrated the limitations of purely digital analysis. While satellite imagery could reveal the existence and general layout of buried structures, it could not provide the detailed information necessary to understand their purpose, construction methods, or cultural significance. More troubling was the discovery that the satellite imagery itself was being systematically altered to obscure the most obvious geometric patterns. Researchers who compared Google Earth images from different time periods found that areas showing clear evidence of buried structures in earlier imagery had been digitally modified in later versions to appear more natural and less geometrically regular. Sweet dreams and ancient secret sand. So ends our drowsy journey through the hidden history of Hawaii, where ancient stone faces watch over secrets that span centuries of careful concealment. As you settle into peaceful sleep, let your mind drift away from these tales of buried civilizations and suppressed discoveries. These stories of missing researchers and classified documents are just whispers from the past, growing fainter now as sleep approaches. The stone guardians we've encountered tonight, whether resting beneath Honolulu Harbor's dark waters, buried in Mauna Loa's volcanic slopes, or hidden in valleys that no longer appear on any maps, continue their patient vigil. They have watched civilizations rise and fall, have seen Spanish priests and shipping magnates, Coast Guard officers and university professors, all drawn to uncover mysteries that perhaps were meant to remain hidden. But now it's time to let these ancient puzzles fade into dreams. The faces carved in volcanic stone with their hollow, watching eyes are just stories for the night. The missing expeditions, the suppressed research, the classified reports, all just fragments of imagination to carry you gently toward sleep. Tomorrow's daylight will bring ordinary concerns and everyday realities. The mysteries of pre-Polynesian Hawaii will seem as distant and insubstantial as dreams themselves. The systematic suppression of archaeological evidence, the pattern of disappeared researchers, the ongoing concealment of underground civilizations, these will be just half remembered. Tales from a sleepy podcast designed to quiet an active mind. Rest now, knowing that some secrets are best left undisturbed. The stone faces beneath Hawaii's soil will continue their eternal watch without your concern. The ancient guardians who came before the ancestors need no help from modern minds to maintain their vigil. Sleep comes easier when we accept that some questions need no answers, some mysteries require no solutions. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me on this journey through Hawaii's hidden history. May your sleep be peaceful and your dreams free from the weight of ancient secrets. The stone watchers will keep their silent vigil while you rest, patient and eternal, waiting for the day when their stories might finally be told, or hoping, perhaps, that they never will be. Sleep well, and let the mysteries of the past dissolve into the gentle darkness of night.